I'm going to show you how I do a wax and tint in real time in less than 45 minutes. So including setup, including mapping, waxing, tinting, and then finishing products. So I like to start out using gloves just to ensure that I'm not cross-contaminating any germs, even though I just washed my hands. And then my setup is super important because I like to be organized. I don't like to waste any products, so having the right amount of products right in front of me is key. So for this client, I thought I was going to use soft wax, so that's why I have some wax strips, but then I changed to a hard wax. I use 2 cotton rounds, one to clean off and then a dry one. I have spoolies, lip applicators, and micro Q-tips. Those are going to be huge to really clean up the mapping lines, and then cotton buds to clean off the tint. I also use water in that spray and then a brow cleanser. So I am currently using the Thuya, but you can just use like a green soap and water. That's the other alternative that I have in my shop. And then as far as mapping materials, it's really personal preference. I have found the best mapping materials to be just a really fine sewing thread with a Sharpie ink marker and then aquaphor. So you'll see how exactly I ink my own string, but not only is it more cost efficient, but I find that it is a lot cleaner than our pre-ink string. So I like to use aquaphor to kind of lubricate the string. So you'll see me just run that through, and then now I'm taking my Sharpie marker, the China marker in black, and I'm just gonna run through the string a couple of times back and forth just to ensure that it's thoroughly inked. And the aquaphor is actually gonna really help the ink glide on skin because we're going to cleanse the skin and it's going to be a little drier, so we just want it to glide really nicely without tugging on the skin. We also I like to use the Sharpie ink marker to just refine the shape after I map. So I want to make sure that the edges are really, thin and precise. So I'm just using very carefully a razor, and I actually do this on a tri-fold paper towel just because I don't like the shavings to get on my canvas, on my placemat, so then I can just kind of wipe that away, and now I am set. So this is my client Mackenzie. I've been doing her brows for a couple of years now, so I am really familiar with her shape. So I will still map a client's brows even though I've done them before, but I won't necessarily show them the shape. So if this was a new client, I would map them and then just make sure my client's okay with the shape before moving on and proceeding with the tinting and the waxing. I am mixing up her color. I'm using Bronsun dye. It's a cream dye, or I'm sorry, a gel dye that we're using. So I started using this in place of our stain and our tint because it stays on the skin for 7 days, and then it also stays on the hairs for up to 7 weeks, really depending on your client's care for that. So you really need such a small amount. It's still a 1-to-1 ratio of the oxidant and the dye, or the tint, whatever you want to call it. And I really use like a pea size amount. You don't need as much product as the brow code tint and oxidant, so just want to keep that in mind. And then I like to mix the color before mapping, just so it allows time to actually oxidize and get to its true color. And I really like to start out any brow shaping service with cleansing and gently exfoliating the brows. I like to use a spoolie and this foam cleanser, really anything that we have on hand. I don't want to over exfoliate though unless we are doing the scrub and exfoliation service, so that's an add-on that we provide. So we'll cleanse, we'll exfoliate with a scrub, and then use a hot towel, but just for this we are just going to make sure that there's no oil, no makeup, no nothing, just so that the tint or the gel dye can really adhere to the skin, and then also the wax doesn't have a hard time adhering to the skin. So we just want to make sure that's nice and dry, and I'm using a dry cotton round to wipe that off. So I'm going to kind of talk through the mapping process, but I encourage you to re-watch this because it will take a couple of times for it to click in your head and to train your eye of what you're looking at. So first I like to map the horizontal lines and then the vertical lines. You want to make sure that these lines are really thin and fine and very neat, because you can easily get confused with a bunch of lines, or if they're thick lines that you're drawing on your client. And this is the part where you want to slow it down. So I've pointed out the points of where you want to cross this line particularly, but this is the line, or these are the lines that are really going to start to shape the brow. So the first two steps were the horizontal and the vertical lines to kind of map out the placement. And now we are really hugging the brow really tight to make sure that, one, they're going to be symmetrical on both sides, and then two, you want to make sure that they're going to not be super thick, not super thin, and it really crosses all of those horizontal and vertical lines. So rewatch where I cross with those dots. Now that our initial mapping is finished, I'm now going to take that Sharpie ink China pen and I'm going to carve out and start creating the curves of the arches so it's not so boxy. And then I also will go back and just refine the shape a little bit, make sure it's nice and clean. This is going to help out the next step and save so much time as we begin to wax and also tint. Now, at this point, if this was a new client of yours that you've never done their brows before, I encourage you to clean up all of the extra lines before showing your client the shape. You don't want to confuse them with all these lines on their face because they don't know what they're looking at. So I am just going to clean all these extra lines, and then also if I need to make any of the lines of the mapped out brows finer and thinner and neater, I will do that as well. So I started out using soft wax, but I realized it wasn't warm enough, so I pivoted and we will be using the hard sensitive wax. This is our new wax that we offer to clients. It's the Rebel, Hypoallergenic and scent free. So that is what I'm pivoting to use from this point on. So I have found doing brows the most efficiently is to start doing one brow and then multitask and start doing the other. This will save so much time. So for example, and what I mean by this is I will start by waxing the bottoms of the brows, and then once I pull off that hard wax, once it's all nice and hard and I can pull it off, I will then begin to tint one brow, and then I will begin to just make sure the other brow is nice and clean. So you'll kind of see what I mean by this, but rather than waxing all at once and then going in and tinting, I kind of do it in little steps to make sure that I am very thorough, and also it's holistic rather than just looking like a stamp after waxing, if that makes sense. So this will make it look nice and fresh and clean. And the same thing with tweezing, so I will wait until the end to do any finishing tweezing, but I actually like to do it as I go as well. So now that the bottoms are nice and waxed and they're clear of any hair, I will start to stamp on my tint. Again, this is the Bronsun tint, and you'll notice that it oxidized a lot since we mixed the color. And I like to place it on the bottoms of the brows first, just because it's going to process a lot longer on those areas since we're applying it there first. So I want it that to be the darkest, and then I will slowly feather it so it's nice and have that almost ombre effect in the fronts. A big difference between the Bronsun gel dye and the Brow Code tint that we've been using is it develops a lot faster. The instructions do say it takes about 2 minutes to be fully developed, so I want to make sure that I'm just watching it appropriately, especially for my blonde clients. You don't want to go dark, too dark for them. So I'm just going to keep my eye on that, and then as that's setting and processing, I'm just going to clean up the bottom of this brow on the right side. So at this point in the service, the dye is adhered to the skin, so as much as you rub it off, it's not going to go anywhere. So I like to go in with the wax off oil just to make sure any residue waxes off of the face, and then I'll also go in with Glymed's comfort cream or rosacea relief and kind of massage that in with my fingers. It's just a nice added touch, and they're there for the experience, but also it'll help any redness, inflammation, swelling, irritation. So I have included that in the brow station for you to leverage. And then a little added touch, just because we are running a little bit early, I am going in with a little concealer to highlight the brow bone. I think the most important part of why I'm making this video is because of not only the methods I've been using. You know, you might do it in certain steps, but I want everyone to become a little bit more efficient with the service, because your clients are on the go. They don't want to be sitting there for so long. So getting really comfortable with these methods and practicing so you can get a service like this under the time that you're supposed to be taking. You can really worry about building that rapport with the client in addition to your efficiency.